On the first day of the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from a far-off land, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you fully obey me and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back, summoned the elders of the people, and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said, and the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes. And be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, 'Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain.'" After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. And then he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations." On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them will perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy." The Lord replied, "Go down and bring Aaron up with you, but the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and told them.
So we're in a darkened room, and we just sang a song that talked about, "Though the darkness hide thee." And Tim just read an entire chapter from the book of Exodus that talks about the people being down at the base of the mountain and God descending to the top of the mountain. And there's distance in all of those things. And could we advance the slide one? That will give me control. We're going to take just a minute or two of silent reflection, and I'd like you to think about what distances you from God. Not what did the song say or what did the Israelites experience, but in your life, what distances you from God. Just take a minute where you are and think about that. God, I thank you that even though you are holy, you have invited us into your presence. And I thank you for the testimony of your word. And I pray that you will help us to see what it says about you. And I pray that you'll help us to apply it to our lives. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. All right, so again, we're in the dark. There's this. That's an awkward passage of Scripture, isn't it? God distant, hey, don't touch the mountain, or the people will stone you or shoot you to death. It's not what we like. We like Jesus who holds your hand and takes you into the presence of God, and he's warm and, has sangria waiting for you on a warm day. That may not have been your picture, and I hope I haven't spoiled God for you, but this passage, it takes us from a place of danger to a place of different danger, from what feels like disconnected from God to a connection with God that is foreign to us as modern thinkers. We'd much prefer a cuddly God than the God who's described in Exodus 19. So Tim has just read that chapter. I'm not going to reread it, but we're going to skim through and look at some things. And in your bulletin, there's a page for notes. If you find that useful, please avail yourself of it. I may mention it from time to time. What we heard in Exodus 19 was thunder on the mountain. And I was in the movie theater watching Dunkirk thinking, okay, even though this isn't the fastest-paced movie I've ever seen, and it's not the hugest visual spectacle, the danger of that movie, sitting in the chair with the bass amped too much, like my little speakers at home can't do, gave me a feeling of danger. And anybody seen Dunkirk? Okay, like double the number of the people at the 9 o'clock service. So way to go, art film crowd, 10:45. It's based on history, right? Germans push the Allied forces up to the north of France, so they're hedged in around and can't escape by land because they're surrounded by Axis forces. There's water behind them, and the British Navy tries to get in for rescues. That's not working because there's not sufficient air superiority by the British. Basically, they are in a completely unwinnable situation. And what gets them out is a bunch of people in little boats coming across the channel from where it's currently safe to where it's currently dangerous and taking people back with them. There wasn't anybody like that for Israel in Egypt. There was nobody offering a hand to shuttle them out. And so this is the story of how Israel got out and then what happened. So the first thing I want to point out is that they remembered, this is 3 months to the day. Hey, cool. I've got a quarter anniversary since God sprung me from slavery and death in Egypt. Okay. Anybody in this room ever experienced some kind of danger or death and survived? I was born 7 weeks premature at the Kaiser in Santa Clara that's torn down, and it's housing now. And at the time, as my father, who's in the back there today, will tell you, the technology that they had to deal with that, I mean, I'm old, so, it was not good. I've got a mental picture, like they're cranking things and stuff. And so from literally from day one for me, there was peril. And I survived. They survived and they remembered. Is there a danger that you survived that you remember? Can you put your thumb in time, a day, maybe an hour because it's that vivid, a year, a season of life, where you said, I was facing it, but I came through. They set out, and they end up in a desert in front of the mountain. I thought the desert setting is pretty appropriate given the temperature this morning. God calls Moses up. This is going to happen a bunch of times, and I just want you to notice, what does Moses do? He goes up. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt. Don't want to be on God's bad side. And how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Okay, here's how God is portraying this escape. He's not saying, I picked you up out of danger, and then I dropped you off somewhere that was safe. He's gone a whole lot further than that. I picked you up out of danger, and I brought you to myself. There is something going on between God and this nation that hasn't been seen before. And the reason that we look at this stuff, you go, man, Mike, this is Old Testament. This is like second book of the Bible. Okay, next week-ish, we start a series on Ephesians. In Ephesus, when Paul is planting the church, when Paul is feeding, watering the church, when he's teaching people, which New Testament book is he using to teach? That's right, there aren't any. No Gospels have been written. He may have written some epistles, but they're unlikely to have made it back to Ephesus because they got Paul. What he's got are the Hebrew Scriptures, and what he's teaching them about who God is comes by seeing these through a lens that he's got because he personally encountered somebody that changed everything, and that's where we're going today. So you go, oh man, it's dark, and it's warm, and that was a lot of reading. It's okay, there's good news at the end. There's very good news. So how can you see God having carried you in that time of need? Do you see a connection at all? Did you just survive, out of the frying pan to somewhere and la-di-da, I'm off on my way? Do you see God's hand in some particular way? Have you ever thought about it? So for that event that you came up with, see whether there's a connection in what God was doing in drawing you to himself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, and I have to stop there, because I'd like everybody in the room who has obeyed God fully and kept his covenant to please stand up. Yep, 0 for 2 services. Good job, by the way. That was a test. This far you've passed. That's excellent. Out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. Ooh, oh wait, it's not me. Who's he talking to? Israel. So, okay, well, any members of the tribe here today? Okay, that's okay. He's got the rest of us. Although the whole earth is mine, are you part of the whole earth? Yay! We're covered! God thought of us. He's in the middle of talking to his chosen people thousands of years ago, and he thought of you. If you don't take hope out of that, I got nothing for you. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. All right. I don't know how excited I am about that, but that's all right. We'll keep going. Say this to the Israelites. So when God says the whole earth is mine, what's your response? Like inside you, do you go, I'm sorry, I am my own? Do you say, I'd like to see the terms of the contract, God, because I'm pretty sure there's some fine print in there that we're going to have to negotiate terms? Do you have a different response? Where do you stand when God makes a claim that you belong to him? Literally, you belong to him. So Moses goes back, says, hey, here's the deal. And they go, we're all in. Everybody familiar with the history of Israel? How long do they stay all in at any given time? Yeah, like the fuse starts burning now and there's going to be an explosion in, a couple of chapters with a calf, and it's not so good. But Moses brings back their answer to God. So I want you to think about Moses' job as a go-between, right? Intermediary, long word for go-between. So Moses is down there, and okay, he gets the answer, and then he goes up, and he tells God, Okay, la la la. God says la la la. It comes back down. All he's doing is transmitting a message. He got a message from God, he gave it. He got a response from the people, he brought it back to God. What's so big about that? Well, you notice he's the only person who's actually interacting with God. Moses is special. And I want to tip my hand here and say, if you are a follower of Christ, you too have been given this kind of role. You are an intermediary because through Christ, who do you have access to? You have access to God himself. Thunder and lightning and fog and smoke and all, you've got access through Jesus Christ, which means there's an implication we ought to be listening to what he says, and then we ought to be bringing it back today to each other, and then starting, 12, 15 or so, out to the rest of the places that we go. Okay. It says, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, and I love this. So the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. And again, if you know the story, this is spoiled a little bit because always is a little, they always have a reason to trust Moses. But people being people, what they do is grumble, they rebel. There's all kinds of bad things that happen, but isn't it interesting that God's got Moses' back? It's almost like you can have confidence in this God, even though he seems a little off-putting and scary. It's almost like that. It's almost like a God who rescues you to take you to himself has your best interests in mind, even while he says, you're mine, and I set the rules about how you can come to me. Just saying. Go consecrate the people today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes. Did that strike anybody as odd? Okay, I'm not going to ask who washed their clothes to come to church. Like that, I'm not actually interested in seeing who says no to that. But isn't the more key thing that the people be clean than that their clothes are clean? Even ignoring logistics like desert, escape, water, detergent, like where do you plug in the Maytag? I got nothing. And yet, this is part of God's explicit instruction. What can he be up to here? I think what he's up to is saying, look, there's no chance you're going to make yourselves pure enough to be in my presence. But what I'm going to ask you to do is acknowledge that that's your desire. You can't clean you. I know you can't clean you, but do your best with your clothes. By the way, do they get to be in the presence of God because of the cleanness of their clothes? No. So happy to see heads shaking. Okay, be ready by the third day. God will come down. So, how did God support Moses by being present? He said, I'm going to talk to you so they can hear. I am going to testify that you and I have a relationship. And so we don't have this weird, I went off and put a rock in my hat and came up with these scribblings and you should follow them. And by the way, 6 of you are going to be my wives. It's not like that. Not to ridicule anybody in particular. That would be wrong. What God is doing instead is saying, here's what I'm saying to Moses, and it's what you've heard before. He is a faithful person testifying to what we have said, and you can hear it. That's really awesome. If we actually carry some of this role as intermediary, how much confidence does that give you that however well or poorly your life reflects his glory, that God is still going to be faithful to you and your relationship as you strive to follow him? Oh, it's good stuff. Okay, and this is where the caution tape goes up. All around the base of the mountain. Don't let anybody near. Why? Because if they touch the mountain, not God's going to zap them. You stone them. You shoot arrows at them. And I'm like, okay, we're not going to apply this as a church, You've made, the mistakes you've made before have been not so good, but this one, we're going to have to shoot you with arrows. Sorry. Okay, that's not the application here. The application here is God is deadly serious with his expectation of maintaining his holiness. Oh my goodness, he's saying that I love you, but there are still limits, and I have to follow them, and so you must, or pay the consequences. So how does God being holy require distance from people? Well, that's how it requires it. If God is spotless, then who among us gets to sit by him and not be, burnt up by his glory, by his holiness, by his purity? So I got shorts out of the laundry yesterday, and they had blue marks on them. There was no new blue clothes in the laundry. I have no idea what happened, but now they're marked up. God will not be marked up. It's just not going to happen. So if you dare to touch the mountain, you can't last. Is that scary? Is it sobering? Is it different than I walk with God and I call him Daddy, which is also true? We're going to have to put these things together in order to make sense of who God really is. To understand that we're not playing with a kitty cat here. We've got the lion. And he's got an agenda for us that either we get along on his agenda or we're gone. Moses goes down, he consecrated them, they do their laundry, and then he says, abstain from sexual relations. And again, this is not the application that we're taking away today. Okay, I am for sexual relations. I'd like to add the constraints, since we're with a younger crowd this service, just keeping in mind that God intended that relationship for in marriage. Okay, so the minute that Tim says you may kiss the bride, it's gauche, but then you guys can run off and but until then, don't. That's not what God intends. Okay. Why here? What's wrong with sexual relations? Nothing. It's a great thing. But God is saying, even this great thing that I gave to humankind, it's just like washing the clothes. You're setting something good aside in acknowledgement that you are going to have an encounter with God that's different than they've ever had. Okay, thunder and lightning, thick cloud, and they tremble. When was the last time you actually trembled in the presence of God? I don't mean like the Shakers, in their worship service back. The people that made the nice furniture had some strange worship services. That reference was for Tim, by the way. How do you experience God's awesome power if your full view of God is he's like a loving daddy? How do you ever comprehend the might and the power and the purity of that? When I walked into this sanctuary this morning, I did not tremble. Now, Aaron picked some fantastic songs that got a little bit of trembling going for me. But my problem, and I suspect your problem, is a deficient view of God that doesn't make him big enough. It doesn't make him different enough from me, and more importantly, from what I want. Okay, well, they're encountering a real one, and he's setting the rules. He led the people out to meet with God. They stood at the foot of the mountain, outside the yellow caution tape. Fantastic. It was covered with smoke. He descended in fire. The whole mountain trembled violently. How do you know when you're in God's presence? I feel warm. I cry. I say funny things. How do you know that you are in God's presence? I'll tell you how they knew. Because everything in nature got unleashed around them. There was a power there that was not their routine. And oh my goodness, the mountain shook. Everybody been through a big earthquake? If you've been through a big earthquake, all right, give me a hand. Come on. Come on. Okay. No matter how long you live in California, that's still disturbing. The ground shouldn't move like that. When is it going to stop? God is like that. I don't have him figured out. You don't have him figured out. His ways, Scripture says, are not our ways. So we're not going to have him mapped out. Okay, but Mike, he's my daddy. Yeah, we're going to get to that. But I want you to see that him being your daddy means a lot more than you and I thought. Okay, louder voice. Moses answers. God descends. Moses goes up. Warn the people. God's worried about the people doing something stupid. I think that's really endearing. You can say, oh, this God isn't, he's the God who rescued them, brought them to himself. He's the one who said, here's how you can approach as close as possible. Here's an intermediary so that you don't have to try to see me face to face. And now he's saying, okay, remind them that no matter how amazing their experience is, that I'm still holy. Even the priests have to consecrate themselves. Be careful. And Moses goes, yeah, we got it. You were very clear. So here's the problem. How you and I, knowing who we are, how are we ever going to go to the presence of God? How are we ever going to survive that presence? How can we make a claim to his time, to his care, to his affection? You got something? I don't. Like my pockets are empty on this. Moses went down to the people and told them. So this is the question of Exodus 19 for us. God is other. We don't have him sewn up. What do we make of that? And the way we make something of that, we're going to start in Revelation 4. So we saw thunder on the mountain. Here's thunder at the throne. And I'll just warn you, we're going to read 2 whole chapters from Revelation on a hot day, and you're hungry for lunch. They're awesome. These are awesome chapters. I love them. And what you got to remember is that the person who's writing this walked with Jesus. He's not an ignoramus. He's a disciple of Jesus personally. Anybody a disciple of Jesus personally? Yeah, no, nice try. Hopefully, we are all disciples or on a track to become one, but he's got it on us. So he looks. There was before him a door standing open in heaven. The voice I had first heard said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there was before me a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And freeze frame, there's a throne and someone sitting on it. And this is Revelation. I don't want you sitting there trying to sort out what the colors mean and what the substances mean. What John is doing in this chapter is taking a look at the throne and who's on it and how everybody around it responds. And that has something to do with us because we just got away from Exodus where they don't have a way of ascending the mountain. And here John is in the throne room. And John's giving us the inside scoop on, okay, that's how it was on earth. How is it on heaven? And here's what happens. The one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby, a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. And just try to picture what it's describing. Don't get hung up on the jasper and the, rainbows and stuff. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. There's not a person in this room who's going to be one of those 24 elders. This is the superhero club here. These are the 24 amazing. Maybe it's the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles. Maybe it's something else entirely. We don't know. What we know is that these represent the people who are closest in proximity to God on the throne. They've got their own thrones. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. Thunder and lightning, suddenly I'm starting to think Exodus 19 again. There's this thunder and lightning theme that's going on, and maybe my concept of God has to include that. These are 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. Any water skiers? Okay, I see 2. Ever seen an entire sea of glass? I'm so happy when I get a patch of it, and I wish that I were out on it right about now, to be honest. Clear as crystal. Okay, sea of glass. We sang about this, by the way. In the center, around the throne were, freaky time again. These represent all living creatures. 4 living creatures. They were covered with eyes in front and in back. Okay, Illuminati? No. What an eye is in this kind of writing is understanding, wisdom, insight, perception. And they got it in spades. The first living creature like a lion, second like an ox, third like a man, fourth like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures' 6 wings was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. And you just go, John, why this? Because these creatures know what's going on. And they're going to do something that we should pay attention to. Day and night, they never stop saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. What is the purpose of having wisdom? According to this passage, it's to say, holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty. Worship is the destination of wisdom. And you can read Proverbs and not walk away with that understanding, though you can read Proverbs and see it there as well. This is what all creation does when it's in its right place as it is in heaven in John's vision. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives, how long? Forever and ever and ever. What is John saying about this person who sits on the throne? He's not like us. He always was, he is to come. When we see what he was like in Exodus 19, with thunder and lightning and warnings, don't get too close because you can't be in my presence, that's a true thing about God. When we see him in John's revelation here, there are creatures in his presence. Something's been set right. And when we see him face to face, man, it's going to be a bright glow, but it's going to be him who enables us to be a part of that. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, you are worthy, our Lord and our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. So these 24 superheroes, they have their robes, they have their thrones, and what do? Continually, they fall down on their face. Tim talked about it, prostrating themselves last week. The people who are the greatest among us have the best grasp of what it means to fall on their faces before God. It's an interesting thing. And what they've been given crowns. They've got gold crowns. But what do they do with their crowns? They take them off and they give them to God. So they fall before him. They worship him. Is there something about you, something in your character, something in your accomplishments, something in your skill set that causes you to say, I'm good. I don't need to fall down. I don't need to participate full out in worship of this one God who lives forever and ever because I'm cool. I could have crossed the caution tape. If there is something, I've got a great ministry. I've got business aptitude like you've got no idea, Mike. I've got rhythm. I don't, but you might. All right. Let's bring this thing home, huh? So we've got God, and his otherness, in a sense, is overwhelming. And it's overwhelming in a bad way for Israel, who are trembling and afraid even to approach. And it's awesome in a good way for the 24 elders, because they don't have a problem responding to this great God. How do we move from fearing and trembling and distance to fearing and loving and revering? How can that happen? And the answer happens in the very next chapter of Revelation. I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides, sealed with 7 seals. I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. There isn't a person here who can do what needs to be done in order to experience God in his fullness. You got nothing to offer perfect, holy God. And I don't say that to discourage you. I say that because we're about to see how that problem is overcome. John's response is not, no, I walked with Jesus. I know what's happening. After he rose, he explained it all to me. No, what's his response? He wept and wept. It's like, oh no, we're in horrible disaster because nobody was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. But one of the elders, in between falling down to worship, I guess, says, don't weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne. Wait a minute, Mike. The center of the throne? Okay, there were 24 thrones around, one throne in the middle. Who's on that throne? God's on that throne. But apparently the Lamb is there too. John's going all multiple persons of God on us. John's saying, okay, you can't separate who God is in his power and majesty and glory on the throne and in his hand offered through the person of Jesus. He's saying that there's no way that you can either approach this one or approach this one. They are part of the same God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And yet, here's the Ancient of Days and the Lamb who was slain. Okay. The Lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes. All right, 7 eyes, it says, are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. What do? They see, they understand. What are the 7 horns? Weird-looking lamb beast. No, horns are power. 7, he's got all power. He's got all insight and all power. This is an awesome lamb. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. When he had taken it, the creatures and the elders fall down before him. Who deserves worship? God alone. And here's this lamb who was slain. How could God be slain? What an amazing rescue operation that God launched on our behalf. When we were yet sinners, God didn't say, I hope some humanitarians launch some boats and pull them out of danger. He said, there's nobody who can get them into my presence. So I'm going to take some of my dignity, set it aside, and come live as a man, a God-man. And he deserves worship. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. I don't think that these prayers are prayers for Aunt Katie's nephews, neighbors, cat who has the sniffles. I could be wrong about that. I think that these are prayers that are the equivalent of holy, holy, holy. God, who are you? You are the one who is forever. Who am I to come before you, God, when you are so perfect, and yet you've extended a way to me? This is worship. This is acknowledgement of who God is. And when you worship, you have an effect on the smell in heaven. You improve the fragrance of heaven. Isn't that frightening? Man, my worship isn't going to amount to anything, but let's together be worshipers who have incense. Now, they sang a new song. They sang a new song. This God has been God forever, right? This isn't a new throne. And yet, they've just changed the song. This is a cataclysmic event. They changed the song and said, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals because you were slain. With your blood, you purchased people from every tribe. Oh, wait a minute. This isn't the Exodus 19 offer that's for the people of Israel, the descendants of Jacob. This is for you and for me. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God. What? That was a promise made to Israel. Guess what? You and I, who aren't Israel, we're in on this deal by the grace of Jesus. Isn't that amazing? Priests and kings, I don't even know what that means. We don't have time for it anyway, but that's big stuff. It's heady stuff. I looked and heard the voice of many angels, many, many, many angels, encircled the throne. In a loud voice, they were saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power. We're going to sing. We're going to sing. And this is what we're going to sing. And the reason that we sing that is because in our little way, on this Sunday in August, we want to try to make earth as it is in heaven. And we can't accomplish that. Our good deeds don't amount to that. Our good intentions don't amount to it. My prettiness is not going to cut it. You know what's going to do it? Is the Lamb who was slain and who sits on the throne. I heard every creature on heaven and on earth, and all of them saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. The living creatures said, so be it. The elders fell down and worshiped. So the Lamb is worthy, having been killed and purchasing people for God by blood. If you're a meticulous filler-inner of blanks, that's on the list. That's why that one's there. Jesus reconciles his followers to God by his sacrifice for them, not by changing the biblical conception of who God is. So what Jesus has done is opened a new facet for us to see of God, where before we could see a facet that's real, but it's not the only aspect of God. And so his mercy becomes tangible. His grace becomes tangible for us in a way that's not normal. So I'm going to ask or I'm not really going to ask. I'm going to put up a couple of questions as the worship team comes up. And I just want you to think about what they say. And I want to give you this. There was an eclipse this week, right? I have a middle school child and a high school child, and for 2 weeks ahead of time, we got emails, there were texts, there were the kids telling us there were permission slips. You can't look at the sun, even when it's in eclipse, they said. Why is that? Well, the sun's really bright, right? And then you get the moon in front of it and you go, oh, I could look at that, and yet it's still dangerous. It's not good for your eyesight. How are you going to fix that? What can you do about it? How could you ever enjoy it? Well, in the case of my kids, one had a pinhole viewer and the other, they got the special glasses. And so what I want you to do is think about the sun is a good thing, but you can't take it concentrated like that. God is 100% good. But you and I aren't, and we can't take it. And he knew that that was a problem. And that's why he gave us eclipse glasses in Jesus. And I apologize if that sounds flippant. I don't mean it that way. We're dealing with more than simple eye damage or even simple life and death here. But the point is that what we couldn't do for ourselves, where we couldn't go for ourselves, where we'd never know for ourselves, Jesus has allowed us to go, and he's given us access to the top of the mountain and beyond. And that's why we're going to be praising him. Think about these questions as they come.